Okay, let's jump right in. In this video, I'm going to show you how I go about drawing some more textures. I'm going to start with a shrub, and the first thing I'm going to do is make a rough outline of 3 shrubs. Now, the trick here is to be very chaotic with your line. I'm constantly trying to change the direction of my pen as I create the outlines of the bushes, but I'm trying to make this look as rough as possible. I do want to mention that I am using a 0.5mm ballpoint pen. This helps me get some really nice thin lines. You will see me later switch over to a 1mm pen, which I'll point out when I do that. But for right now, I am going to start to fill in the shading on this bush. Now I'm visualizing a light source from the top left of my scene that is hitting the top of my shrub, and this is going to translate to a shadow on the underside of my shrub. Now that is why I'm trying to focus all of my line work toward the bottom of each shrub. Now let me talk a little bit about what I'm doing with my line work. Specifically, what is going on in my mind. As I am drawing these lines, I am trying to remain loose and constantly change directions with my pen. In my mind, it's almost as if I am trying to draw tiny triangles, but I'm going too fast and I'm unable to actually complete any of them, or I'm changing my mind halfway through, and the result is a very chaotic line. By constantly keeping my pen moving, I'm getting this nice scribble effect. Now, I'll continue on each shrub, but you'll notice that as I get to the edges of the shrub where they overlap, I'm very careful not to get too close to the edge. I want to give it some space so that the highlights come through and there's some nice separation between each shrub. Now I'm going to switch over to a 1mm pen tip right here, and this will give me slightly thicker lines that will help me kind of fill in those shadows, going back over my line work where I think the shrub might be the darkest. And it's worth mentioning at this point that I chose not to include any of my markers in this set of textures, so there's no shadings with the alcohol markers. This is strictly line work. Now, I want to take a moment to mention that if you enjoy this content, please give it a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you like these tutorials. Okay, moving on to the next texture, I'll be drawing some pine branches, and starting with the 0.5mm pen, I'm going to draw a skeleton structure for the branches. I usually will create these in 2s or 3s, but I will draw them across the page, and once the branches are done, I'll start to fill in the pine needles by starting with the top branch and working my way down. The reason that I'm doing this is because the top branches are going to overlap the bottom ones, so I'll draw those first. Now drawing the pine needles is just a matter of creating loops down each branch, and I'm careful not to overlap the loops too much. Also, as the loops get closer to the tip of the branch, you can see that I'm trying to angle them toward that tip. One thing I do want to point out is that I will always try to put at least one loop at the very tip of my branch. I know it can be kind of tedious to draw all of these loops, but at the same time, I kind of enjoy the repetitive process. I really do find it soothing. I'm going to go ahead and jump forward to wrap these up. And once I've completed all of these branches, the next step is to switch over to the thicker pen, my 1mm pen, and fill in all of the gaps in background. I'll use the pen to color in the areas without branches, which is going to give me some nice separation from that background. Now, as I'm working through filling this background, I might find opportunities to add some more branches or even color over some existing branches, just whatever I need to do to kind of shape the scene better. Okay, again, I'll skip ahead. And once I've colored in the entire background, I'll switch over to another technique to help me separate the branches a little bit better. Using the same 1mm pen, I'm going to start to trace the pine needles that are closer to the base of the branch structure, especially the ones that kind of go underneath the overlapping branches. This causes the loops to appear thinner and almost as if they're receding into the background. This technique is what adds the depth to these pine branches. Again, I'm not going to be using any markers to add shading, but this would be a good opportunity to use shading in these areas to embellish that depth for this scene. And our pine texture is done. For the last texture, I'm going to draw some wood planks. I'm going to draw 3 separate planks, and I'll start by tracing the outline of each plank, focusing on making sure that the sides of the planks are irregular and rough. Once I've established the 3 shapes, I'll add a few horizontal lines as texture to help separate the wood planks. The idea is to exaggerate that rough surface where the edges of each plank meet. Now it's time to add the nails. In my mind, each plank has been nailed down in the 4 corners, so I'll go ahead and make 4 dots on each corner of the plank to represent those nail holes. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick stroke across each nail to represent a split in the wood. Now, using this same quick stroke technique, I'll go to the edges of each plank and make those strokes across the wood plank. I'm using the rough edges to help me place those strokes, so the appearance is that the wood is kind of deteriorating or splitting around those rough edges. I'll do this for the rest of the wood planks. And once I'm satisfied, I'll switch over to my 1mm pen and fill in the background. I'll also use a stroke between each wood plank to separate them better. Now I'm going to switch back to my 0.5mm pen and add a series of long strokes to add texture to each plank. I'm using the natural shapes that have appeared through my previous line work to help me determine where to add the extra texture. I'm kind of visualizing the wood surface as having peaks and valleys, and the goal here is that this technique is going to better represent that 3-dimensional rough surface. And that's it. Those are the 3 textures. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial.